Hello, 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 and welcome. We are in day two of talking about bereavement, grief, and loss. This is in honor of National Bereavement Day, which is today in Canada. And I just want to give a shout out to the Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association, which created this day as a way leading into the holidays that we can talk about loss, we can talk about bereavement, we can talk about grief. And I have to tell you that when I was the director of the hospice in the Columbia Valley, so my name is Maria Kliavkoff, and I was the founding executive director of the Hospice Society of the Columbia Valley. When I discovered that Canada was implementing a National Bereavement Day, I thought this is perfect. Now, I'm a dual citizen, I'm US and Canadian, and so US Thanksgiving is a very important time for me. And for this day to always show up the week before we head into the Thanksgiving Day long weekend, that was brilliant because it was a way for me to bring mindfulness to the place where I was feeling lost, where I was feeling torn apart, where I was feeling grief. So, again, I'm just going to cover briefly what we talked about yesterday. And if you want to hear more, of course, go back to the video from yesterday. What we talked about was how bereavement literally means to be torn apart. What's so important about that is that we need to recognize that at some point in our life, every one of us feels torn apart. We are torn apart by the losses in our lives. Sometimes they're traumatic losses, sometimes they are losses that we expect in terms of somebody has been ill for a long time. That doesn't make the loss any more gut wrenching, right? Traumatic loss has its own specific, unique challenges, and yet every loss leads us to grief. Grief is the internal experience of those losses, mourning, the external expression of that loss. If we have loss, everyone who has loss experiences grief, whether it's conscious or not. In this society, unfortunately, we really are predispositioned to bury and carry our grief. We're expected to get over it quickly. Nowadays, we sometimes don't even have funerals, and certainly with COVID, we've had that problem where we haven't been able to have funerals. So, as we step into this, it's really important that we understand that we need to give ourselves the space and grace not only to be present to our grief, but to allow the grief to convert into mourning, to allow that internal experience of loss to convert into external expressions of loss. However, if we're inclined to bury and carry our grief, what ends up happening is that every time any kind of grief response comes forward, for instance, we feel tempted to cry, and of course, tears are mourning, they're the external expression. If instead of allowing ourselves to cry, we choke it back, we push it down, if other people being uncomfortable with our tears makes us choose to not free the tears but rather bury them, or if we're afraid that those tears, if we start crying, we're never going to stop, what ends up happening is we harden the symptoms of grief. And we talked quite a bit about that yesterday. So I'm not going to go down that conversation today. Again, if you want to hear more about that and you didn't hear yesterday's talk, I invite you to go and look at that talk. If you have questions about this, of course, put it in the comment section or private message me and let's have a conversation about it. What I want to focus on today is grief in the holidays because, of course, we're heading into the holidays. And I think National Bereavement Day, at least what I witnessed when I was in the hospice office, it gives every hospice across Canada the opportunity to open up the conversation as we head into the holidays. Why would we want to do that? Why would we want to open up to our loss, open up to our grief, particularly if we've been bearing and carrying it as we head into the holidays? Well, the holidays are a natural trigger to our grief. And when we've been bearing and carrying our grief is awaiting our welcome to it. It's awaiting a time when we are willing to be present to our grief. Why do we fight so hard against our grief? Have you ever wondered about that? You know, in our society, we tend not to be comfortable with expressions of grief. That's absolutely true. We want people to get back to their old selves, which is an impossibility. But I believe underneath it all comes this myth that what grief is about closure. And because we identify grief with closure, The part of us that knows that that's not true, that we can't bring a closure to this relationship, fights against it. And what we fight against is we fight against our grief because we're not willing to bring closure to the relationship. I'm going to tell you something that maybe others don't say, which is closure is not only not necessary, closure is the wrong goal. So I'm just going to let that sink in for a minute because I think that's a really important concept for us all to kind of wrap our brain and wrap our heart around. When people are saying write goodbye letters, put everything you ever wanted to say or will ever say into those letters, that's staggering. Because the reality is, as Mitch Albom wrote in his beautiful book, Tuesdays with Maury, death ends a life, not a relationship. And what's so important about that is that we understand that the death, which is the event, death means that our loved one is no longer physically present. It ended their physical presence on the earth, but it didn't end our relationship with them. Our relationship with them exists in so many ways. It exists in memories, it exists in conversations we have yet to have with them, even though they won't be physically present to the conversation. They may be present in another way. And so, what we want to do is we want to begin to think about grief in a different way. And that's why I talk about the healthy mourning revolution. It's why I created the healthy mourning revolution. I want to revolutionize the way we think about grief and mourning. I want us to understand that grief is a remarkably graceful and gentle journey when we allow it to be, when we recognize that our grief journey is all about us moving through and discovering where our relationship with our beloved is now. And that's a hard journey. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not something that with a funeral we're now over it. We're never going to be over it, but we need to understand what we're never going to be over is the relationship. It's not the death. The death we will get over. And the grieving process is how we do that. Many people stay stuck in the grieving process and are absolutely committed to, I will grieve for the rest of my life. And they say this out loud, in part because it's like a loyalty that is a misdirected loyalty. We think that if I grieve for the rest of my life, that's my way of never forgetting my loved one. But truly, when we say we're going to grieve for the rest of our lives, we're locking down our loved one in that place of the moment of death. And I'm going to be grieving that over and over and over again instead of understanding that the relationship continues when we allow it to. And that grief is our process of finding where the relationship is now and how we're going to move forward, how we're going to move forward in our lives, how we're going to find love again, how we're going to find joy again, and we're going to find love with our loved one as well as with others. Our heart isn't going to close and constrict. Our heart is going to open through the process of grief. And so, Healthy Mourning Revolution is all about us stepping into this new way of approaching grief, where grief is a curiosity, where we want to stay present to what's going on so that we can better understand. We're willing to be present to what's happening. We're willing to listen to our grief because we know that our grief knows our next step through the process. And then we journey through the process and we do it with ease and grace. And so through the holidays, this may seem overwhelming. And I want to be very clear for somebody who's lost a loved one recently, and by recently, I mean in the last 3 to 6 months, that's still recent. If if the idea of the holidays is so overwhelming, just let it go. Don't worry about it. But if you are looking at holidays and you're worried about what the holidays will trigger, can you imagine if you begin to recognize that those triggers, if we welcome them, actually bring us to a deeper place of relationship with our loved one? Can you imagine what a magical holiday you would have if that's how you approached it? So, what I want to do is, I want to share with you a little bit from a book that I wrote. that speaks about this, because I think it can really support you and help you in this place. And again, on this National Bereavement Day in Canada, what we want to do is we want to recognize we've been torn apart by this loss, but this loss doesn't dictate our future. How we walk with our grief teaches us and teaches our family about how to be present to these moments and how to allow ourselves to find where the relationship is now. No conversation of closure, no conversation of severing a relationship, because that's just not the truth of the journey. Okay? So the book I'm going to be reading from is Healthy Mourning, Happy Loving: 52 Ways to Convert Your Grief to Mourning. That is the book that I wrote and that was released a year ago next week, actually. It was released on Friday of US Thanksgiving. So I'm going to be doing a special Facebook Live a week from Friday, because I really do want to honor that day and talk about grief and the holidays on that day. We're going to start that conversation now. So I'm reading from page 43 in the book. The chapter is called The Challenge of Holidays. Holidays can be a very hard time for those who are grieving. Memories are everywhere, and the longing to have your loved one with us can make the idea of celebrating overwhelming. How do we use the holidays and the feelings they bring up to continue our grief journey when the temptation to run from the feelings and ignore the holidays is so great? As with all other moments in grief, it begins with the earnest intention to move through the grieving process by befriending our grief. By befriending our grief symptoms and giving our kaleidoscope of emotions an avenue of expression. As the holidays approach, there are key things we can do to help us lean into the experience instead of hiding from it. And so this is really how we want to transform the way we think about the holidays coming up, is that the holidays can actually be the conduit through which we lean into our grief process as opposed to avoiding it or hiding from it. That can be very challenging when we have family members who aren't willing to go down this pathway, and we want to talk about, the how to's of how to navigate those waters. We want to explore what are the different things that will be memory triggers, and how do we approach those memory triggers. And what I did was I actually created a special PDF with 4 different approaches. And throughout the month of December, for those of you who join us in the Healthy Morning program, we're actually going to talk about those 4 conversion techniques and how do we stay present with it, and how do we work through the grief process utilizing the benefits of the holidays and enjoying the holidays, because that's really what we want to do. We want to enjoy the holidays by honoring and welcoming in those memories, by converting them, by creating new traditions. These are the things that will warm our hearts. These are the things that will allow us to be present to everything that's available to us right here, right now. So if you're feeling torn apart, if you are bereaved and you're feeling torn apart, first of all, please know my heart is with you. It's agonizing when we've lost a loved one. And I remember, my very first big loss was my grandmother. My grandfather died when I was younger, but my grandmother was my best friend, and she lived with us. And at 13 years old, to process that she would never be there again. And so things like decorating the tree, which was always the task that the two of us did together, the overwhelming task of suddenly I'm going to decorate the tree alone, or maybe family members will join me, but they won't do it her way. And all of the emotions that that brings up. As a 13-year-old, I lived in a household full of people who far preferred to bury and carry and avoid their grief. I had a godmother who said to me at that time, "Don't you know your sadness is making your mother sad? You need to stop being sad." For all of us who get those kind of buck up, move on messages from people who are well intentioned, now, please remember this. People who are giving us those buck up, move on messages are absolutely well intentioned. They want us to feel better, and they don't know how to make us feel better. They want everybody in the family to be okay, but we're not okay. We're broken apart. We're torn apart. We are a bereaved family. So we either choose to be a bereaved family together, or we recognize that our tears, there are some people with whom we cannot shed our tears because they're not a safe place, because our tears bring up their buried and carried grief. And so the best that we can do is have a little bit of grace and patience and understanding that these people are not safe people for us to be mourning with. And so we choose our people and our places to mourn. But that is possible in the holidays. And that's part of what makes the holidays overwhelming, is this idea that we can't do that because we're going to be inundated by family, and our assumption that our family is not open to the conversations. And I say assumption because it's amazing when we gently introduce the conversation, even those people who say, I don't want to talk about this person, I don't want to think about this. Um, when we gently invite forward their natural grief process, it's amazing what can happen and what can transform in a family. So, what I'm doing, and I want to share this with all of you in the Healthy Morning Revolution group because it's so important. Most of you have seen parts of the live launch, even if you haven't seen the whole live launch. And we're going to be doing another free live launch in January. Feel free to register for it. We'd love to have you on board. If you want to register for it, just go to healthymorning.com and click on register for the next live launch. We would love to have you there. Um, but here's the thing, by the time that live launch happens, we're going to be launching a brand new Healthy Morning Revolution program. We're calling it HMR, Healthy Morning Revolution Program, right? We're going to be launching the HMR program that is based on what Healthy Morning 2020 did this year. So Healthy Morning 2020 was all about going through the book, because once you write a book, for those of you who've written a book, you know what I'm talking about. Once you write a book and then you put it out there, the next job as a writer is to discover what you've written. Because when you're writing, at least for me, you're bringing forward information and you don't understand the depth and the breadth of what you've written until you actually study it and you work with it. And so I committed to this year really working with it. When I wrote it, you'll notice I said to you the subtitle on this is 52 Ways to Convert Your Grief to Mourning with Ease and Grace. I didn't shoot out or start out with the intention of writing 52. 52 came to me. 52 is what was written. And it was only once this book was in production that I kind of went, oh my goodness, there are 52 weeks in a year. Well, what would happen if we actually did a conversion technique every week of the year? And so I created the Healthy Morning 2020 program specifically to explore each conversion technique, one conversion technique at a time. It was beautiful and it was brilliant, and we're in the final weeks of it because, of course, there are only, what, 5 or 6 weeks left in 2020. And I know for many of us, we're saying, thank goodness, right? 2020, good riddance. Um, what I want to do is I want to invite all of you as part of the National Bereavement Week to sign up for 2020 if you haven't already, so that you can kind of tap into what we're doing and how we're doing it. Because what we do is we actually, every week, we had our weekly meeting this morning. Every week we read through one chapter, and one chapter is literally just 2 pages, right? It's a page that explains what the conversion technique is, like what I just read to you. Then I talk about a personal experience of the conversion technique, and the next page is the getting started page, which is just, I don't know if you can see that or not, it's heart points that help you to think about how you might want to get started. You are the expert on your grief. And when we talk about grief and mourning, we want to make sure that you understand you are the expert on your grief. Nobody external to you, even if they've had the same kind of loss, they haven't had the particulars of your relationship. They haven't had the particulars of the way your loved one died. They haven't had the particulars of the circumstances you're dealing with right now. Only you know your grief journey. What this book does is it meets you wherever you are, and then it invites you to take that next step. And if you're not sure what that step is, that's what I'm here for. That's why we do a monthly Q&A, so that we can answer all of the questions that come up during the month. During the week, we explore how do we take what we read on Tuesday morning and throughout the week consciously convert it. And the benefit of that is, can you imagine a year from now? For those of you who are really struggling with grief right now, who are feeling like you've carried and buried your grief for long enough, you know that those symptoms have hardened over time. You know you're not an angry person, but you're exploding with anger all over the place and you don't know how to control it anymore. That's buried and carried grief, right? You're having these experiences of symptoms locking down. Maybe they're physical symptoms. Maybe your knees aren't working the way you need them to. And when you think about it, you realize that that started at the time of the death of your loved one, or your shoulder's a little sore, or your back sore. There's so many physical symptoms of grief that get locked down when we bury and carry it, because that's the part of our body that's carrying it, that's carrying the pain. And that body part was never designed to do that. The body part was only designed to deliver a message to you. Yeah. So when we commit ourselves to converting our grief to mourning, what happens is we finally feel free. Our grief recognizes that this is the welcome it's been waiting for. And whether it's been 6 months, or it's been 6 years, or it's been 2 decades, because I've had clients with all kinds of buried and carried grief, and I've had clients with very fresh grief. What happens is we need to recognize that when we open up the door to the welcome and we make a conscious choice that it's going to be a gentle welcome, that it's going to happen with ease and grace, and that we're curious, we're going to stay present to it, and we're going to be really curious about where our grief journey leads, and that we will never, ever, ever have the closure conversation other than to say, closure is not necessary. The curiosity is, where is the relationship now? Then we discover that it can be with ease and grace, that that journey can be with a remarkable amount of ease and grace. And so, what I discovered in the book in doing the 2020 journey over this past year is that that the order of all of them, they're not thematically ordered. They were dropped in with whatever needs to happen. And I'm a firm believer in right and perfect timing. So if you take the book and you open it, that's the page that you're needing right then and there. And that is beautiful and that is perfect. But what I've learned over the last year is that we can thematically bundle 4 conversion techniques at a time. So that's a month at a time. And what I wanted to do is, for December, I wanted to bundle together the 4 conversion techniques, and there are 4 of them in here that are specific to the holidays. So what I'm doing is, for people who are in 2020, who, for all of you who are there already, who are already taking the Healthy Mourning 2020 program, you're going to be grandfathered in at the price that you paid when you signed up. I'm absolutely committed that the price that you pay when you sign up for a program, because it's a monthly subscription program, that's the price that stays with you no matter what happens to the price of the program. You are always grandfathered in at whatever price you paid coming in. Okay? This week is going to be the last time that that program is offered at the $49 US price. The normal price is $69. The live launch price, we take $20 off of that, and it's $49 a month. And when you sign in at $49 a month, when you register for that, then every month is $49 a month. It doesn't go up when the price of the program goes up. Because of the way we're bundling it, because of what we're doing, the price of the program is going up. It's actually going to $149 a month US. Okay, that's what it's going to be once we initiate the program. All right. If you want to get it for the $49 a month, you're going to need to register this week, because at the end of this week, that will be it. Next week, we're doing this special Friday launch because, again, next week it's the 1 year anniversary of the book. We're going to do a special price on the $149 on Friday. But I'm going to tell you right now, that special price next Friday will be higher than the $49. Okay? The price next Friday is already going to be higher. So if you feel called to this, if you know that this is the pathway, I just want you to imagine, if you've been stuck in grief, I want you to imagine a year from now, when you've really taken the time to explore, and not in sadness. There are going to be sad moments. There's going to be pain, because that's part of the grief journey. We're going to move through that pain. Pain we can move through relatively easily. It's the suffering when we fight against the pain that is the challenge. For people who are in their grief journey and who just don't know how to get out of it, and they're constantly in the sadness of the grief, or they've made the decision that they're going to be grieving for the rest of their lives because it's a loyalty to their loved one to hang on to that pain, that's actually not pain that they're hanging on to. What they're doing is they're hanging on to the suffering. And the suffering is the resistance against the pain. It's an old Buddhist saying. And the Buddhist saying is this: in life, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And so the Healthy Mourning Revolution program is all about taking the suffering out of the equation and allowing us to move through the pain with ease and grace. The whole intention of it is to get to the other side, to enjoy life again, to allow those symptoms that have hardened over time to not only release, but to be relieved from your body, to be relieved from your mind. So when I say we're going thematic, in December we're going thematic, and the theme is going to be how do you handle grief in the holidays? In January, we're going to be looking at physical symptoms of grief, and we're going to be doing 4 weeks of focus on physical symptoms. By February, we're going to move to mental symptoms of grief, and we're going to map out for you all of these themes throughout the 12 months. And I guarantee you, even in month number one, you're already going to feel so much release and hope for the future that you know you can have, where you can reclaim your memories. You don't have to shy away from them anymore. So it is my hope that you will join us on this. I will put a link for the registration for Healthy Mourning 2020 because we would love to have you join us. Today we had a lovely conversation about love letters and how to use love letters as a conversion technique. And it was just such a joyful conversation. You'll have access to all of those videos that we've done this year. And we look forward to having you in that program. So, this is the last week to sign up for Healthy Mourning 2020. If you wait until next week, what's going to happen is you're going to come into the Healthy Mourning, the HMR, Healthy Mourning Revolution, the HMR program. You're going to be registered for the HMR program, and we're going to be doing the 4 weeks of grief journey around the holidays. But the Healthy Mourning 2020 program, this is the last week to sign up for it. And we're going to be finishing out Healthy Mourning 2020. So for those of you who are in this program, not only are you going to have the holiday four, but we still have some conversion techniques to talk about that have nothing to do with holiday between now and the end of the year. So I invite you to be part of this journey with us. Wherever you are in your grief journey, please know we're here for you. If you want to find how to connect with the book, if you want to find how to connect with me, and we can do a private chat, we can do a discovery call for a half an hour, just go to healthymourning.com and click on whatever resource you're needing. We're here to support you in your grief journey on this day where we're bringing focused conversation about grief and mourning and bereavement. My hope is that you have an aha. My hope is that you feel hope around your grief journey and that you recognize that place where you're feeling torn apart, that bereaved place inside of you, it can be healed. It wants to be healed. That grief that you're feeling, that's the pathway to the healing. Let's befriend that pathway and let's convert that grief to mourning so that we can live our lives in joy, in happiness, and with the memories and the love of our loved ones. Much love to you all. Namaste.